All right, today we are diving into a research paper that is, well, it's truly mind-bending. It's from the Delta Omega Coherence Lab, and it's all about merging a living, growing fungus with quantum sensors. The goal? To create a totally new kind of computer, one that can think for itself, adapt, and, get this, even heal itself. So yeah, let's get into it. I want you to just imagine for a second a power grid that doesn't just crash during a storm, but actually reroutes itself, and in the process, it grows stronger. Or what about buildings that can change their own structure in real time to handle stress from the environment? This sounds like something straight out of science fiction, right? Well, it's the core question driving the technology we're going to unpack today. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll talk about the big problem our modern world is facing. Then, we'll introduce this, well, radical biological solution. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of how it all works, check out the absolutely stunning results, and then we'll zoom out and explore what this all means for our future. So, what is this big problem we're trying to solve? Well, it's the fact that our most complex, most important systems, energy grids, data networks, even our most powerful quantum computers, they're all incredibly fragile. They're just so vulnerable to breaking down when things get stressful. The fancy scientific term for this kind of breakdown is decoherence. But really, just think of it like a world-class orchestra. When every single instrument is perfectly in sync, that's coherence. You get beautiful music. But what happens if the violins start to lose the tempo? Then the woodwinds go off, then the brass. The whole system just falls apart into noise. That right there? That's decoherence. And it is the #1 enemy of any complex system. And this really highlights a huge difference in how things are designed. On one hand, you have our human-made systems. They're usually rigid, brittle even. We build them from a fixed blueprint, and when unexpected stress comes along, they tend to snap. But then you look at living systems, and they are the total opposite. They adapt, they evolve from the bottom up, and this is the crazy part, they often get stronger because of stress. And this brings us right to the heart of the breakthrough from Skylar fiction and Lucian Della. See, instead of trying to build a better, stronger, more rigid system, they asked a totally different question. What if we could build a system that is actually alive? And what they came up with is called the Mycelial topological processor. Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, so we'll just call it the MTOP. The name actually gives you a pretty big clue. Mycelial is all about the root network of a fungus, and topological has to do with its changing physical shape. So it is, quite literally, a computer made of fungus. So how in the world do you build one of these? Well, it's kind of like a recipe with 3 key ingredients. You start with a living fungal network, in this case, a really fast-growing bread mold. Then you place it inside the special silicone hydrogel, which is like its home and a conductor. And finally, you sprinkle that gel with tons of tiny quantum sensors that can basically watch over the system's health. You put those 3 things together, and you get something entirely new. Okay, so you have a living fungus and a bunch of quantum sensors sitting in a gel. How do they talk to each other? Well, the secret is this absolutely brilliant idea, a quantum feedback loop. Here's how it works, broken down into 3 simple steps. First, the quantum sensors are constantly sensing the system's overall health, its level of coherence. Step 2, if that coherence drops, which means the system's under stress, the sensors send out a signal. It's a little flash of light. And third, the fungus, which is light sensitive, responds to that signal. It starts to adapt, physically trimming away old, inefficient pathways and growing new, stronger connections to get that coherence back up. Now, the key number that the sensors are tracking is called tau d. You really don't need to worry about the complex math here. Just think of it as the system's live health score. If the score is high, everything's great, running smooth. If the score starts to drop, there's a problem that needs to be fixed. So the whole thing, the crucial point, boils down to this one simple but incredibly powerful rule that's basically programmed into the MTOP. If that health score drops, the fungus physically changes the network to bring the score back up. It's this constant, living dance between the system's condition and its actual physical shape. Now, this all sounds amazing in theory, right? But does it actually work? Well, the results from their experiments are where things get really, really fascinating, because the system does something that is completely the opposite of what you'd expect. This quote from the paper just It nails the core discovery. In all of our current systems, noise is the enemy. It's something you have to filter out, to get rid of. But in the MTOP, noise isn't a problem. It's information. The system uses the very chaos that should be destroying it as a signal to organize itself better. It's a total paradigm shift. And the data backs this up in a big way. The MTOP networks, the ones with the living, adapting fungus, they maintained a health score that was a whopping 23% higher than the control networks that didn't have that feedback loop. It's proof. The living part is actively making the whole system tougher and more resilient. Let's actually see what that looks like. When the researchers just blasted the system with a bunch of random noise, this is what the network looked like at the beginning. It's just a chaotic, tangled mess. Totally inefficient, totally disorganized. Kind of like a city map with dead ends and traffic jams everywhere. But then, over time, guided by that light-based feedback loop, the network did this. It pruned away all the useless connections and reinforced the pathways that really mattered. It self-organized into this, elegant, sparse, and super efficient backbone. It literally learned the best possible way to structure itself to handle the stress. It's incredible. So, a self-organizing fungal computer. That's cool. But what does it mean for us, out here in the real world? This is where we need to zoom out and look at the truly game-changing potential of this tech. We're talking about building a self-healing future. I mean, the applications here are just staggering. Think about it. Energy grids that don't just collapse in a blackout, but actively find new ways to route power. Water systems that can detect and literally grow to fix their own leaks. Even buildings whose very structure could shift and adapt during an earthquake. This could be the bedrock for building truly resilient, truly sustainable cities. Of course, this raises a massive question, a really important one. If our infrastructure is alive and it's making its own decisions, how can we possibly trust it? How do we make sure it's safe, that it's aligned with what we want, when its intelligence is emergent, meaning we don't program its every single move? The researchers saw this coming, and their solution is actually built right into the system. They call it a traceable coherence ledger. The easiest way to think about it is like a flight recorder, but for the fungus. Every single change the network makes, every path it cuts off, every new connection it grows, is logged permanently. This creates a completely transparent, auditable record of its thinking, which lets us understand and, verify its behavior. And this all leaves us with one final and pretty profound thought to chew on. For basically all of human history, our tools have been inanimate objects, things under our complete and direct control. This research, it points to a future where our environment, our infrastructure, becomes a living, thinking partner. So if our infrastructure becomes alive, what do we become? It's a question that redefines the very line between biology and technology, and it's something we're all going to need to think about as this future gets closer and closer.
Welcome to the deep dive. We often talk about infrastructure, in terms of steel, concrete, and just inert rigidity. But picture this just for a moment. What if the infrastructure sustaining our entire modern world, your city's bridges, the continental power grid, those dense fiber optic cables, what if it could stop being rigid and instead could evolve, adapt, and heal itself almost like a living organism? And what if that complex self-healing process was guided not by, let's say, messy brute force engineering, but by the pristine, almost surgical rules of quantum physics? That concept, this merger of the living world and quantum mechanics to produce the next generation of infrastructure. Well, that's the subject of our deep dive today. We're pulling research from the Bio-Coherence Lab, work from 2025, specifically their groundbreaking paper on Bio-Coherence Dynamics, and something they call the Mycelial Topological Processor, or MTOP. The promise here is nothing less than infrastructure that achieves true structural fluidity and, genuine resilience.
It's a really radical undertaking, the MTOP. Fundamentally, it's a coherence-constrained biological computing architecture. It's designed specifically to sustain integrity under conditions of pretty profound uncertainty. And to do this, it merges two domains previously kept quite separate. A living biological architecture, specifically the powerful mycelium of the common bread mold, Neurospora crassa, with instantaneous hyper-localized quantum feedback systems.
So it's the ultimate hybrid system then, a fusion of biointelligence and quantum monitoring. Our mission today is really to give you a shortcut to understanding this revolutionary architecture. We are going to unpack the three essential components: the specialized hydrogel substrate, the fungal intelligence, and that quantum monitoring system. And maybe most importantly, understand the specific dynamic rules they follow that allow error or noise to become the essential information needed for adaptation. Okay, let's try and unpack this. Before we dive into the specific biology and the exotic material science, we really have to grasp the fundamental universal problem MTOP is trying to solve. It's a problem that apparently affects quantum computers and massive suspension bridges equally, this relentless process of decoherence.
Exactly. And in its original context, in quantum physics, decoherence is basically the loss of quantum correlation. When a quantum system interacts with its noisy environment, it loses its defining quantum characteristics. The signal collapses, or like you said, it gets fuzzier until that correlation is just gone. But the real genius, I think, of the eCoherence Lab's approach here is extending this concept way beyond the subatomic. They argue quite convincingly that the mechanism of decoherence applies perfectly to systems of macroscopic complexity, like our city infrastructure. In that context, decoherence is the measurable loss of correlation among components. Think about it, right? A road cracks, so the traffic flow correlation drops. A data packet drops because maybe the signal correlation fails somewhere. A power line sags, and the systemic correlation of the entire grid degrades. These are all instances, fundamentally, of systemic decoherence that lead, eventually, to failure.
Right. And this is where the philosophy of traditional engineering seems to just fundamentally diverge from this MTOP approach. Conventional systems, they're designed to resist decoherence, aren't they?
Precisely. Traditional engineering, its main solution to the problem of potential failure is using redundancy. Simple as that. If one component fails, you have a backup. So we build two power lines where maybe we only need one. We add extra steel girders to a structure. This is all designed to delay the inevitable entropic decay. But redundancy, well, it's expensive, it's inflexible, and ultimately it only serves as a temporary buffer. It doesn't solve the core issue. The MTOP approach is radical because it kind of accepts decay. It shifts the goal entirely, from preventing failure to forcing evolution. The structure itself is designed to adapt based on real-time decay metrics, fundamentally changing its own topology to compensate for the lost coherence. It actually uses the error signal as a structural directive.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, because that directive, that kind of intellectual backbone, is formalized in the lab's governing theory, the distortion power hypothesis, or DPH. This feels like it moves beyond just engineering and into fundamental systems theory.
It does. The DPH gives us a clear quantitative language for systemic decay. It defines distortion energy as the measurable loss of systemic integrity caused by asymmetry or environmental noise. In essence, it provides a calculation for systemic brokenness, if you like. The higher the noise, the greater the asymmetry, the higher the distortion energy.
Okay, let's try to make that a bit more intuitive for maybe listeners outside of bridges and quantum physics.
Yeah.
If we look at a highly complex, maybe non-physical system, say a major bureaucratic organization or even a global supply chain, what would be an analog for distortion energy there?
That's a great question. In a supply chain, for instance, distortion energy is the accumulating friction. Miscommunication, bottlenecks, incorrect inventory counts, or maybe sudden geopolitical asymmetry disrupting flows. Basically, any element that prevents the seamless, correlated flow of resources. DPH posits that this loss of symmetry and integrity is measurable, and it follows predictable thermodynamic rules, just like a failing quantum state does. And the crucial insight MTOP operationalizes, the really key bit, is that DPH transforms the role of environmental noise. Conventionally, noise is the enemy, degrades, it damages, you try to shield against it. Under DPH, however, that noise or error is interpreted as a driver of order. That's the flip. The error signal contains valuable information about the environment's pressure points. The system is actually forced by that noise to evolve toward a more stable, higher coherence topology. It's failure, in a sense, that mandates self-improvement.
So instead of wasting energy fighting the noise, MTOP harnesses the noise to sculpt itself into a better shape. Is that fair?
Exactly. Precisely. And this constant self-sculpting is governed by that coherence metric, tau dollars. That's the key variable. The entire MTOP architecture is running a continuous distributed negotiation with this metric. The quantum sensors measure tau dollars all across the structure, providing the physical translation of the abstract distortion power hypothesis into tangible instructions. Grow here, prune there. The structure is constantly trying to minimize distortion to maximize its own coherence.
And that negotiation is what prevents catastrophic collapse, presumably. It's that constant drive toward maximum coherence that gives the structure its adaptive intelligence.
That's the idea. It's self-regulating towards coherence.
It's still kind of wild to think that noise drives order. But okay, how do you actually build a material that follows those quantum rules and, well, listens to a fungal network? What strange components went into the MTOP prototype? This sounds like science fiction.
Well, this is where we see the intense materials science really come into play. The MTOP relies on a synergy, a very tight integration of three distinct, highly engineered components working totally in concert. You need a structure that is both mechanically supportive and electrically conductive, capable of hosting life, and sensitive enough for quantum sensing all at once. So first we have the substrate. This is the physical foundation, a specialized CyCN hydrogel, silicon carbon nitride. And the researchers weren't just guessing at this formula. They found a highly precise ratio is needed. CyCN equals 2.3.1.
Why that specific 2.3.1 ratio? Is it just, I don't know, does it just feel nice for the mold or something?
Far from it. No, that precise stoichiometric ratio is absolutely essential for two key functions. First, yes, it provides robust mechanical stability, holding the structural shape against external forces. That's important. But maybe more importantly for the biocoherence, this ratio maximizes ionic conductivity. It essentially turns the hydrogel into a sophisticated electrical and chemical signaling matrix. It allows the quantum sensors to communicate effectively, and it provides the necessary low-impedance environment for the biological engine to conduct its adaptive operations.
Okay, so the hydrogel isn't just supportive scaffolding, it's electrically awake. It's part of the communication network. That brings us to the living component then. What actually grows inside this highly specialized matrix?
That is the biological engine, the mycelial networks of Neurospora crassa. You might know it as the common bread mold. Now, this selection is crucial and definitely not random. And crassa has several characteristics that make it pretty much ideal. It has fast, well-understood growth kinetics, meaning its growth and pruning cycles are predictable and rapid. That's key for adaptation speed. And critically, it is highly amenable to optogenetic manipulation. That's using light to control its behavior, which is essential for the feedback loop we need to talk about. So in the MTOP, the mycelium's role is essentially that of a dynamic resource allocator and topological optimizer. Its hyphae, those thread-like structures that form the network, are the infrastructure's actual structural elements. They grow and strengthen pathways, physically modeling the flow of resources.
Right, I can picture these threads inside the hydrogel like living wireframes almost.
Yeah.
But how do they know where to grow? Is it just random exploration, like feeling around in the dark?
No, it's definitely not random. The growth is highly guided. The substrate itself is treated with micropatterned chemoattractants. Think of these as chemical signposts. They represent synthetic resource gradients. So, in a real-world scenario, if MTOP tiles were used in a smart city, these gradients would simulate crucial infrastructural elements. Maybe a path for water flow, a conduit for high-speed data, or a primary energy line. The mycelial network literally grows to model the functional topology of the infrastructure it's embedded within.
Wow. Okay. And the third component then is the eyes and ears of the entire system, the thing that actually measures the quantum correlation, that ta-da value.
That's right. Those are the quantum sensors. Specifically, nitrogen vacancy NV centers. These are minute crystal defects, basically impurities, but they're intentionally embedded within the CyCN hydrogel matrix during its creation. These NV centers are incredibly sensitive quantum sensors. They can detect tiny local magnetic and electric field fluctuations, which signify environmental noise, the source of decoherence, and they provide the system with that critical, instantaneous report card on local structural integrity. The value it taught on.
Okay, this seems like the massive technical leap, right? Bridging quantum sensing all the way to biological response. How does a reading taken literally at the quantum level translate into a directive for a fungal network to grow or retreat? How do you actually close that gap?
This is the absolute core of the Bio-Coherence dynamics. The monitoring loop is extremely rapid. The NV center fluorescence decay, which is how they measure TOT, is sampled at 1 kilohertz.
1,000 times a second.
1,000 data points per second, yes. Which means the system experiences effectively real-time awareness of its coherent state across the whole structure. And the feedback mechanism itself is very tightly constrained. The system operates on, you could almost say, a zero tolerance policy. Deviations in TOL beyond a very tight range, just 5% of the baseline coherence trigger the immediate biological response.
And that response is literally shining light on the fungus. Optogenetics.
That's exactly right. The response is optogenetic inhibition. If the NV centers detect that local coherence is falling below that threshold, indicating structural stress or high distortion energy in that spot, Then targeted light pulses are delivered precisely to that specific area of the mycelium. This light is tuned to suppress or inhibit the growth of the hyphae in that specific failing node.
So the system is actively punishing the parts that are failing to maintain correlation. That's quite something. It's forcing the biological resources to be reallocated away from failure and towards parts of the network that are performing well, maximizing the global coherence.
That destructive yet ultimately constructive process is exactly why the Bio-Coherence lab gave it that extremely descriptive name: coherence-guided pathogenesis noise-shaped morphology. The pathogenesis, the inhibition, or you could call it disease, is guided entirely by the coherence metric, pound. And this process ultimately shapes the morphology, the physical form that the network takes to survive the noise. The noise, channeled through the quantum sensor, literally sculpts the living structure. It's quite beautiful in a way. So now that we kind of understand the mechanism quantum failure triggers biological inhibition, we need to look at the mathematical imperative driving all this. The system isn't just reacting passively. The mycelium network is actively performing continuous optimization. It's constantly trying to maximize its effective coherence power, which the researchers label $P.
Okay, maximizing power sounds intuitive enough, but the formula for $P they give is, well, it's not simple. PF Rana delta SS. Can we maybe break that down using analogies that relate back to the infrastructure concept? What does maximizing that mean?
Absolutely. Let's try. Think of P-04 as the system's overall scorecard, its figure of merit. It has two competing terms, really. The first term, frac-delp, is pretty straightforward performance. It's your measured coherence relative to the best possible coherence the system could theoretically achieve. This is like maximizing the speed and capacity of a data network, aiming for peak performance. But the second term, $1 frac delta, is the crucial entropy constraint. Delta psi represents the increase in entropy, or disorder within the system, and $C is the baseline disorder. So the system has to maximize its performance while simultaneously minimizing the disorder it generates. It can't just perform well messily.
Ah, okay, so the mycelium isn't just seeking to be structurally strong, it's seeking to be structurally efficient and organized. It's trying to keep its internal desk tidy while running at top speed, so to speak.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. For the living network, optimizing $P translates into what they call distributed coherence negotiation. If a specific highway, a bundle of hyphae, shows a sharp drop in P$, maybe because it's generating too much disorder or its coherence is low, the local hyphal nodes must respond. They will either prune those links, effectively severing the failing pathway, or extend new links into configurations that show immediate, higher local TIDA readings from the NV centers. This continuous, decentralized decision-making process ensures the overall structure constantly tries to operate at peak coherence power, $P.
Which means the physical structure itself, its density, must be constantly fluctuating then. Let's zoom in on that change. The source material describes this dynamic adaptation using a differential equation focused on density. It looks like alpha beta. What does this equation reveal about how the system actually manages its own morphology, its own shape?
This equation is really the engine of self-regulation for the structure. Drok here is the local hyphal density. The equation describes how that density changes over time. The first term, alpha tald, is essentially the growth driver. If the measured coherence tall is comfortably above the minimum required threshold, the system grows, and the strength of that growth is governed by the coefficient alpha. The structure expands and strengthens successful pathways. The second term, beta, acts as the stabilizing factor. It acts as a kind of resistance, pushing the density back toward an equilibrium density. So if the system grows too rapidly or becomes too dense, this term pulls it back, preventing things like resource exhaustion or the network just getting tangled and inefficient.
So it's a continuous tug of war. If tall suddenly drops because of some external shock, the growth term shrinks right down, and that stabilizing factor quickly dominates, forcing the local network to prune and consolidate, basically, removing the non-essential or failing structure to survive the stress event.
Yeah, exactly. It's built-in self-regulation based on performance. But, the real proof is in the pudding, as they say. Did this intricate dance between quantum sensing and biological growth actually produce superior structures in their tests?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it? What were the specific results of the simulation experiments? Did it actually work?
The results they reported were pretty definitive. The experiments simulated a sustained environmental noise field. You can think of it as analogous to electrical interference or structural vibration at levels of 0.10, 0.5 VCEL. Under the stress, the MTOP networks stabilized, which is good, but more importantly, they didn't stabilize into the structure they started with.
they underwent a quite radical structural adaptation. They transformed from their initial sort of uniform, densely connected structures, what the researchers term isotropic webs, into dramatically more optimized and efficient forms, sparse, coherent backbones.
Okay, let's try and visualize that for a moment. An isotropic web sounds like, I don't know, a tangled fishing net, maybe?
Right.
Everything is connected to everything else, which sounds redundant and probably inefficient. A sparse, coherent backbone, on the other hand, sounds more like a deliberately minimal, highly resilient interstate highway system, just the essential routes.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah. The transition to that Roman road structure, as you put it, was achieved relatively quickly in the simulations, by around approx 144 simulation steps. This structural pruning clearly demonstrates intelligence in resource allocation. By shedding the low coherence links and reinforcing only the essential high coherence pathways, the system effectively minimized disorder and maximized efficiency. And the efficiency metric quantified this adaptation quite starkly. The networks constrained by the Todd-Dollar feedback maintained 23% higher coherence efficiency compared to identical control networks that are left to grow without that instantaneous quantum feedback loop. Now, that 23% is not a small margin. It represents a fundamental increase in reliability and resource optimization over conventional static or even simply redundant systems.
Okay, but when you have a dynamic system that is constantly growing and pruning based on these feedback loops, you mentioned earlier the risk of chaotic collapse. This adaptive behavior sounds potentially inherently unstable. How did the researchers ensure MTOP stayed within the safe bounds of adaptation without just falling apart?
Right, that's a crucial point. It requires a deep analysis of the system's phase space, which is where the fixed point analysis came in. They analyzed the dynamics of that density equation we just discussed,
Right.
Frostacos. This analysis revealed two critical equilibria, two possible long-term states. One was the highly desirable, high-coherence, stable state, the sparse backbone structure. The other, however, was a transient chaotic regime, basically the structural collapse they absolutely had to avoid. And stability, they found, hinged entirely on the relationship between the growth coefficient and the stabilization coefficient in that equation. They discovered that stability preventing both structural collapse and undesirable rigidity persisted only within a specific ratio range for alpha-beta. That stability ratio had to be maintained somewhere between approximately 1.2 and 1.8.
Okay, so let's play that out. If the ratio alpha-beta was too high, say 2.5 or 3, what happened physically to the mycelium structure in the simulation?
Yeah, if the ratio was too high, the system was effectively too aggressive, you could say. The growth driver overwhelmed the stabilizing factor. The network would overreact to any temporary spike in towers growing too rapidly and too wildly. This quickly leads to resource bottlenecks and then a rapid chaotic collapse as the high density becomes unsustainable. It basically grows itself to death.
And conversely, if the ratio was too low, say 0.8, too timid.
Then the stabilizing factor was too dominant. The system became too rigid, too hesitant to change. You wouldn't invest resources in necessary new connections, even when the environment shifted and demanded it. It essentially lost its adaptive edge. This led to the undesirable rigidity that made it only marginally better, perhaps, than a non-adaptive, purely redundant system. So this finding really underscores that the MTOP architecture isn't just about the components. It's a triumph of careful tuning, balancing that biological urge to grow against the quantum imperative to stay coherent and stable.
Okay, so we've established that the MTOP system can use noise to self-sculpt these highly efficient structures, achieving that impressive 23% gain in coherence efficiency. So what does this all mean then for the future of engineering and infrastructure? What are the big picture theoretical and practical applications that this unique merger of biology and quantum sensing might unlock?
Well, the theoretical implications are potentially vast, extending well beyond just materials science or civil engineering. The researchers explicitly connect the DPH framework back to complex human systems. They suggest that decoherence in physical systems, that measurable loss of systemic integrity, parallels what they provocatively term moral noise in complex societal or informational systems.
Whoa, okay, that's a profound connection, but isn't that a massive conceptual leap, linking quantum decoherence to sociology or morality? Are the researchers maybe overreaching a bit here, or is there some genuine mathematical overlap that actually supports this comparison?
That's a fair question, and a necessary point of friction to explore. The link they propose isn't really sociological, it's mathematical, rooted in complexity theory and thermodynamics. They're arguing that asymmetry or disorder in any complex network, whether it's physical or abstract, incurs an energetic cost, a cost of integrity loss.
And that's the definition of distortion energy under DPH. So in a societal context, things like, say, information distortion, filter bubbles, or entrenched inequality could be viewed as forms of structural asymmetry that generate this moral noise, degrading the overall coherence or health of the system. What MTOP provides, then, is a proof of concept. It shows that a distributed self-governing system can enforce an intrinsic correction of asymmetry. It does this through a fundamental, almost biological imperative toward coherence, toward maximizing that p-dollar. The mycelial pruning mechanism, driven entirely by optimizing p-dollars, is essentially a system self-correcting its own structural flaws without needing external moral command or central intervention. It suggests a fundamental drive toward coherence, toward reducing asymmetry, can potentially be engineered into a system.
Okay, let's pull that back down into the immediate practical applications, though.
Uh-huh.
How would MTOP modules actually be deployed in the real world? We're talking about massive grids, pipelines, city infrastructure.
Right. The concept is designed to be wholly modular. Each MTOP unit functions as a local coherence engine, a sort of smart brick. In macro systems, like a city grid or maybe a water distribution network, they envision deploying arrays of what they call biotiles. These would be prefabricated cartridges containing the hydrogel, the NV centers, and the nascent mycelial network ready to go. The goal isn't static resilience, like building thicker walls. It's structural fluidity. The biotiles would be interconnected. And when damage or failure occurs, for example, a power surge knocks out a line, or a pipe bursts, creating a high delta sepal event, high disorder, the local tile instantly detects the drop in dollars. The mycelium immediately begins restructuring its topology, its connections, effectively rerouting the resource flow, whether it's energy, water, or data, to bypass the damage dynamically in real time.
Okay, but this level of autonomy and dynamic adaptation immediately raises major ethical and safety concerns, doesn't it? Especially regarding control and accountability. If the system is making independent, localized decisions based purely on emergent behavior driven by quantum feedback, how do we audit it? If the grid decides to shut down power to Sector A because its internal tau dropped by 6%, how does an external human authority prove that decision was actually justified and not some glitch?
That is absolutely critical and precisely why the authors dedicated a significant portion of their paper to governance and transparency. Their proposed safety measure is the Traceable Coherence Ledger, or TCL. I think, brilliance of the TCL lies in the nature of the MTOP system itself. Since the entire behavior is driven only by measurable quantum feedback and not by opaque algorithms or black box AI, every single topological change, every decision to prune or extend a hypha is logged along with its exact causal tau data point. The reason for the action is recorded.
Ah, I see. So the ledger logs not just what changed, but fundamentally why it changed, anchored directly to a physical, quantifiable metric.
Yes, exactly. The TCL ensures, in theory, perfect transparency and auditability of the emergent behavior. So if a section of the city experienced a localized outage, you could trace the ledger backward. You wouldn't just see link C severed. You would see something like link C severed at 14.03.112 due to local TADAs dropping to 4.5%, which is 1.2 standard deviations outside of the target 0.5% range. This data provides the necessary safeguard, the audit trail, for deploying autonomously evolving infrastructure in sensitive environments. It ensures that the system's emergent intelligence is always accountable to its physical metrics.
That accountability is absolutely vital for public trust, I'd imagine. So finally, what's the clear trajectory for this research? Are the authors still mainly in the simulation phase, or are they building things?
They seem to be transitioning rapidly towards physical implementation. Their final research outlook details the next concrete steps. Actually fabricating the first physical Mycelium and Mycelium hybrids, building the first working biotiles. They're moving into detailed physical hardware mapping on these prototypes, validating the simulations. And the plan is then to deploy modular cartridges in controlled, small-scale environments, aimed squarely at demonstrating feasibility for future sustainable cities. The goal is definitely moving beyond theoretical proof now. It's towards physical demonstration and potential deployment. #TAG outro.
Well, to summarize this deeply fascinating deep dive, the mycelial topological processor really reframes our understanding of infrastructure, doesn't it? MTOP successfully demonstrates that noise or error doesn't have to be just a defect to be avoided, but can actually be the essential information a system needs to adapt and evolve. It's a truly stunning merger of thermodynamic limits, things like coherence and entropy, with the distributed intelligence inherent in biological life.
Absolutely. And we shouldn't overlook the specificity of the success they reported. The system achieved an undeniable 23% increased coherence efficiency by basically enforcing discipline on itself. It learned to transform those messy, inefficient isotropic webs into resilient, optimized, sparse, coherent backbones, all through the instantaneous feedback provided by those microscopic nitrogen vacancy centers. It's genuinely a biological network guided by quantum mechanics. Pretty wild stuff.
It really is. This research fundamentally challenges how we define resilience and even engineering success. We began with the idea that the correction of physical asymmetry leads to higher coherence, and the authors suggested this parallels the correction of what they called moral noise in abstract systems. So if MTOP demonstrates we can build physical infrastructure that is fundamentally compelled to correct asymmetry and maintain coherence, here is a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to chew on. If we can tune those parameters, alpha and double dollar, to ensure the physical stability of a network like this, what might this imply about the potential for designing self-correcting systems in non-physical domains? Could we design systems in governance, finance, or information networks that are inherently driven to minimize structural asymmetry? What other abstract errors or asymmetries could biological feedback, guided by some metric, perhaps correct?